Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my buddies John Gerard, Neil Polachek, and Greg Sterling. What's up,
Hey,
guys?
Andy.
How's it going? Hey.
How's it going?
Going great. Another big week here in the world of AI. And this week's episode is about to question things that are starting to hit the real economy. Is AI creating opportunity or quietly reshaping who gets left behind? We'll start with the job market, where a growing number of recent grads, white-collar workers, and even career counselors are struggling to find footing. Official unemployment numbers still look relatively healthy, but underneath the surface, there's a growing sense that something has changed, and entry-level work is getting squeezed. Kids are out of school or are having a harder time getting jobs. Hiring is slowing in some sectors, and AI is starting to absorb job tasks that are used to training the next generation of workers. So that's happening on one side. And at the same time, Anthropic just launched Claude for small business, embedding AI directly into everyday tools that companies already use, which means that AI is already moving into experimentation and becoming operational infrastructure for small teams. So we'll talk a little bit about the adoption of that. And then also the next frontier in AI monetization, which is advertising. Ads are already starting to show up in ChatGPT, but right now they're weak, and Google and Meta have tons of data, and their targeting is way better. So we'll jump into that a little bit. And then finally, the AI hardware race is heating up. Google just announced the Google Book, a Gemini native laptop, while OpenAI is reportedly working on an AI first phone, and Apple is reported to put cameras into AirPods. So we'll dig into all this stuff. But first, let's jump into our first story, the soft job market for college grads and AI anxiety. Let's start with the economy, because there's a growing disconnect between what the numbers say and what people are actually feeling. Unemployment is still relatively low, but new grads are struggling hiring, getting new jobs, and career counselors are also worried as well. John, you want to lead us off with this one?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna maybe kick us to Neil for that anecdote first on the yeah.
Great.
So I'm out here in New York City, and I was seated next to a woman who used to be the career counselor at Barnard College here in New York City. And I asked her, how she felt about being retired, and she said, this was the best possible time I could retire because I'm watching my successor, who I trained, really struggle to help the graduating class find jobs. She said it's very difficult right now. She even believes that her old job that her successor took over will probably be eliminated by the college. Now, some of that is, these colleges' budgets have been constrained quite a bit because of some political stuff, some non-political stuff. But she said it's just she said it's weird, was kind of her word. The job market is really weird and really strange, and she's delighted, frankly, to have retired just in time. So, John, you have some anecdotal stuff too, right?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so here's two more data points to add to this very briefly. So one of them, I had a really interesting conversation with my sister actually just this morning, who was talking about my 12-year-old niece. They were working on some homework, and my sister went to ChatGPT just to learn more about the thing that they were trying to figure out. And my niece's response was immediately to say, "You can't do that. That's cheating." And it was such an interesting moment because the kids right now, and I think this goes all the way from K to through college, are being told, if you use AI, you're doing it wrong. If you use AI, you are cheating, and if you use it in any form, right? Now, meanwhile, all of us on the other side of college recognize that AI is transforming everything, and the last thing that we want to do is train a bunch of kids that AI is the boogeyman and should be avoided at all costs, because it's not. It's actually the
Because they'll
thing.
never get a job.
They'll never get a job. They'll never get a job. And this leads me to my second sort of interesting anecdote. Other end of the spectrum, recent college grad, extremely accomplished, looking for a finance job. He reached out to me for some help in contacts and positioning himself. I look at his resume, And it's really, really impressive. He's done some very impressive, very deep financial analysis, and been involved in some PE style businesses, and has a nice resume. And there's no mention of AI in it anywhere. And my first thought is, hey, look, these are interesting tools, but these tools were relevant 5 years ago, and they're not relevant anymore today. And if you don't have something where you can go to an employer and say, I know how to use AI, then you're making a mistake. And his response to that was amazing. He said, oh no, actually, I used AI to do all of these things. And in fact, I have a portfolio in GitHub of all these little side projects I've done and all these prediction market apps I've built. And I was like, well, that's the headline, right? So yet again, I think that even this kid graduating senior going on into the job market has internalized AI as bad, downplay it, don't introduce it into the conversation. And that's exactly the wrong message in going into the job market.
I would introduce another kind of a concept here, which is the concern that if you talk about AI too much, there's a perception that you did not do the work or that you are less capable. That this is a widely held view in different situations where people are using AI but not talking about it because they don't want their own effort to be discounted. I think that's a valid concern, and I think the trick here is to figure out a way to talk about AI that doesn't reduce your
value add.
your value. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've moved from this world of AI where it's a chatbot where you like plagiarism and this kind of thing, where that is a stigma. And of course, it's naturally like, oh, you used AI to do that, so you're cheating, right? We've moved from that, or we're in the process of moving from that to more of agentic AI, which is a much more sophisticated kind of way of using the tools and creating workflows and creating apps. And John, you mentioned GitHub, for example, and creating these kinds of skills that are a world different from just a search engine or a glorified search engine chatbot kind of experience. And in that kind of experience, that's where I think somebody can really differentiate themselves to a company and bring that kind of capability. There's a really interesting bubble chart that was going around the web, where each dot is 3.2 million people on this giant graph, and if you look at it, you look at this kind of market size that shows here's how many people haven't used AI at all, which is the lion's share of it, and then you have a subset of that where you've got people who've used it some of the time, and then you've got some of the people who are paying $20 a month to use these apps, and then you've got one little tiny square of people who are using it for creating apps or creating agents and this type of thing. And that's really the environment that we're in right now, is that the people who are creating these apps are futurists right now in the grand scheme of things. And that's where I think an advantage for somebody who's out looking for a job can bring a lot of value to a company to help them transform their workflows and create efficiencies and do these kinds of things in an agentic level. And that to me is like where, if you want the shortcut to getting a job in this job market, you have to be at that level and speak to that level.
But
Yeah.
let's dive into that a little bit further. Graduate
Yeah.
coming out of Barnard or whatever, and they're trying to get a job at XYZ company, and says, the recruiter says, so have you ever used an AI tool to build a presentation? What do you say? No, I've never done that. Okay, strike them off. Or I've done it a lot and I've found some ways to really make this thing work, so that, 5 years ago, you would expect me to build one presentation in 2 weeks, and now I can build one presentation in 2 days. Like, the employee, this prospective employee, is caught between this. I'm leveraging it to be more efficient and more effective. Is that a good thing? Or oh, no, I only build them by hand. I only handcraft my presentations. I mean, like, that's a real dilemma, I think, today for
Yeah,
people.
I think that's right. I think that, I mean, the answer is clearly, some version of the former, right? Like I use it and here's why, and here's what's interesting about it. I think what I think is a little scary is, if we look at the original, what we call digital natives. So this was kids who grew up with the internet. They did all kinds of things with the technology that we did not expect at all as non-digital natives, because we were locked into old ways of thinking about things. We are not empowering the AI native, the prospective AI native generation to do that same kind of
We're not
experimentation.
rewarding it.
We're not
We're not
rewarding it.
rewarding it.
And
Yeah.
so it's happening in other places. I mean, this is I've talked about this before. Like when I talk to my son who's about to graduate from Stanford, of all places, I know way more about agentic AI and about, applying the models to interesting things than he does. And that should not be the case by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, when I was out with him and his friends and I was talking about all this, one of the other kids was like, yeah, I don't really know about it either, but my dad's really into it too. Like, so that is totally upside down. And I think a lot of it has to do with the AI is a third rail issue for schools. Like we have switched back to blue book exams because it's too scary. We've got all these anti-AI technologies to stop people from using it. And so now it's a bad word, and we are not allowing these kids who are the perfect a group of people to take this stuff and run with it and turn it into something really exciting. We're not allowing them to have those experiences.
But I mean, I think it's a complicated, multi-layered issue. When I talk about AI with my younger daughter, who's 20, about to be 21, she will bring up the ethical and environmental impacts of AI, data centers, water, energy usage, and so there's this quality. When we were sort of coming of age professionally, these tech companies were all cool and interesting and innovative and making the world a better place and doing really cool stuff. The new Google thing was really cool. The new Apple, MacBook or phone or whatever it was, people would eat these things up, and it was an exciting time, and technology was going to make the world better and all of this. And that has really changed. That larger context has really changed. And what we have now is something very different, which looks like, you know, exploitation and extreme greed and people who are indifferent to the impact of their technologies on the larger society. And I think there are a lot of people in Gen Z or younger people who are very concerned about those things and see that as part of, of course, they're being shamed if they use AI or whatever, whatever the multi pronged disincentives are. But
And yet, you saw the story about them being able to identify pancreatic cancer like way before it can be
oh
done.
yeah, no, totally.
I mean,
There's a lot of there's a lot of good stuff about it.
yeah,
There's a lot of
and
good stuff about it.
and if you said to your daughter, well, gee, yeah, but look at this over here, and God forbid should one of us, have that diagnosis, I'm like.
She would acknowledge that. She would acknowledge that. She wouldn't rationalize that
And
or
so how does society really navigate this? Because that's really where we're at, is like we're laying them all those issues on the table, that there's some really, really powerfully good stuff that comes out of it. And at the same time,
it's not a
yeah,
binary choice. It's not a yes or
right,
no choice.
right.
It's a yes but or yes and kind of situation. And the other thing is that people are afraid of what AI, there were discussions about, like, there was a Claude developer conference and the developers were afraid that AI was going to replace them. And there are a lot of employees who express fear that as they're being encouraged / coerced to use AI in the workplace, that they're going to lose their jobs and be replaced. And in the technology industry, and I'll let somebody else talk in a second here. In 2026, according to layoffs.fyi, which tracks layoffs, there have been 108,000 tech employees laid off in 2026 from 137 tech companies.
Yeah.
Most of that is blamed or attributed to AI. Some of them may be just mismanagement or overhiring during the pandemic, but people are losing their jobs,
Yeah.
you know?
So I mean, I think absolutely, and put in historical context. The anti-progress, anti-technology people have never won, and they won't win this time either. I mean, the most famous example is the Luddites back when, but we've talked about this too. That the anti-talkies group with movies, right, going from silent film to sound. This destroys everything. Or there's the famous example of the disappearance of an entire industry around horse buggies and the industry around managing and horses and cleaning streets from all the horses that were pooping all over the place. That was extremely disruptive to an entire ecosystem. And those people found other places as a result of the very changes that disrupted them. So that's like the medium arc of things in every historical case. This time, is it different? Possibly. There's a possibility of that, but at least based on precedent, that's what it looks like. And it also papers over the very real pain and suffering that individual people experience in those transition periods. So, when the horse and buggy to automobile thing happened, we're not talking about like, oh, this was like 2 weeks of difficulty and then everybody got car jobs. This might have been a decade or 20 years, like an entire generation being displaced and dealing with, the angst and anxiety about that before, the economy kind of recovered and their kids got jobs in industry. So
I mean, that happened during the so-called China shock, when a lot of manufacturing was being outsourced to Asia and China in particular. And what happened to many of those people is that they could not replicate the benefits and incomes that they had in those manufacturing jobs. And that's really what's at stake. It's not that somebody can't find another job or that they won't survive. It's that they won't be able to replicate what they had before because it's gone, or there's less of a need for it or whatever. And so they exist at a lower standard of living. And this is the real uh socioeconomic concern of all this, is that a lot of people either never get jobs that will pay enough to do the things that we're supposed to aspire to, or people who lose jobs won't be able to get back to the place that they were before. There was an article in Wired about a woman who had been a producer in Hollywood, who I didn't read the whole article in detail, but basically she was describing the experience of being a trainer for AI. Which is a job she took because she needed the work, and what a horrific experience it was. And it's sensationalized, obviously, for entertainment value, but that's an example, maybe an extreme example of something that happens to people. And
yeah.
that's really the issue. How does society cope with potentially large numbers of people who no longer can afford to buy things, pay rents, buy houses? That, it becomes a problem for society when those numbers are large enough and people stop spending or aren't paying money that previously they were putting into the economy.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but it's probably makes sense to like talk pragmatics, and maybe this is over a couple of episodes about like, what do you do? Like you're a recent college grad, or you're a displaced worker or whatever. Like, so what do you do next?
You would become a plumber.
I mean, okay, so maybe, right? So like trade schools, I mean, look, if we're building as many data centers as we think we're building, like we're going to need a lot of people in construction, right? And there's also, I think, a good prescription that's sort of evolving around college grads on the white collar side. The things, a friend of mine, a guy I know, Aaron Hoffman, who writes a blog called Summation, that's excellent, has talked very specifically about be a builder, an operator, or a closer, right? So if you're a builder and you know how to use AI to build interesting things that people care about, like that's valuable. If you're an operator and you know how to use AI and agentic AI to make things run more smoothly, that's valuable. And if you're a closer, like sales, the ability to get business transactions done, still extremely valuable. And actually, one last thing I'll add on that, Jason Calacanis, who's another kind of big pundit in the space, he's coined this new term, orchestrator of agents. So he says recent college grads and really anybody who's looking to survive in the AI world, if you are a good orchestrator of agents, you can become invaluable to the organizations that you're working with or working on yourself in ways that are very protective in the short and middle term.
That was actually my point. That's such a good way to frame it up, John. And I think that what you just mentioned there about being what did you say? It was you're either a closer, a builder, or a what? Or an operator? Yeah.
Operator.
So those are business first principle thinking, right? That is how businesses operate. And I think it's such a great fundamental way to strip it all back and say, what is required of a skill set of anybody that's looking in the job space. You're out of school and you're looking for a job, and you say to a company, I can be a catalyst that's going to take your sales calls, for example, and I can turn that now into something useful, and I can automate, follow-ups, for example, for your sales team and help you sell better, the closer part. Or if you're an operator and you say, okay, let's look at your operations and see where things are highly repetitive tasks and ways that I can help create efficiency there, that frees up your team's time so they can be more strategic. You're not replacing people, you're just helping them operate more efficiently.